With their combination of effectiveness and low cost, it's no surprise that minefields have been and continue to be a powerful defensive tool. The ability to limit travel for forces on land and sea both lowers the military presence needed for a given position and greatly impacts enemy forces. This is the same when it comes to tanks and other armored vehicles, which can easily be damaged or destroyed by these hidden explosives. With such a deadly threat, it's obvious that a safe and effective means of dealing with minefields is important for any military. Recently, we looked at a failed German design which was built using a Panzer III chassis, but in today's video we will look at something even more absurd, this time by the Brits. Before we begin with the topic though, I need to give a special thanks not to a sponsor, but rather to Ed from the Armored Archives channel. Much of the information you are about to receive has not been released until this point and is all original documents from British archives which he kindly provided to me for this video. If you find British armor projects interesting and haven't checked out his channel, you really owe it to yourself to do so. Though his channel is fairly small, he gets the information directly from the British archives, which means many of his videos have previously unseen information and even corrections on common mistakes made by other historians. I'll leave a link to his channel below, so go check it out once you finish here and make sure to mention I sent you so he knows we appreciate his work. Now let's get into the topic of this video. As I mentioned in the intro, the concept of a minesweeping vehicle was by no means a new one. Many designs utilized rollers or flails, with some examples including the Sherman Crab and the more modern Minenraumpanzer Keiler. Although these sorts of devices have seen production, other, more complex designs were considered throughout history. The two which most closely resemble the vehicle we will look at today were created by Germany during World War II. These are the Alket-Versuchskraftfahrzeug 617 Minenraumer and the Krupp Minenraumer S. We will definitely cover these in videos of their own, but the concept for a dedicated mine-clearing vehicle which could essentially shrug off the blasts with minimal damage did not die with the Third Reich. At this time, an exact date for the start of the anti-tank mine clearance vehicle, later known as the mine-resistant vehicle, is not known, but it seems to originate sometime in the mid to late 50s. The information we have about it ranges from late 1959 through to 1967, so some information about the early history is still unknown. Regardless of that, we have more than enough to cover the design of the vehicle. As I mentioned in the intro, the idea of this vehicle was to allow safe passage of minefields. The exact description is found in a report on the project dated January 1968 and reads as follows.
The M.R.V. is intended to clear a passage through anti-tank minefields by actual detonation of the mines using a vehicle which simulates the target vehicle against which the minefield has been laid.
This is basically a long way of saying it was meant to drive through a minefield and detonate any mines in its path. Shown here, the initial concept for the M.R.V. would use a 4-track layout with a central hexagon-shaped hull roughly the size of a Centurion. The power plant would be contained within that central hull, keeping it safer from blasts. Though more refined, the later designs would still share this overall layout with a more square shape. Interestingly, the layout of this vehicle somewhat reminds me of the Frank Tinsley design called the Baby Assault Tank, which I covered in a previous video. There is definitely no connection there, with the Tinsley design being fairly absurd, but the similarities are certainly noticeable. Estimates put the M.R.V. at approximately 47.3 tons with a length of 25 feet 8 inches, 9 feet 8 inches tall, and 10 feet 10 inches wide. This gave the vehicle a power-to-weight ratio of roughly 13.3 brake horsepower per ton and a maximum road speed of a blistering 16 miles per hour. Looking at the design, you may be asking where the crew is intended to sit. Unlike tank-based minesweepers, this vehicle was planned to be entirely remote-controlled, all but eliminating the risk to personnel. Probably the most interesting aspect of this design was how it was planned to cross the mine-laden ground. Rather than driving in a straight line like a typical armored vehicle, the M.R.V. was going to do a sort of crab walk. Initially, we see that the two rear tracks were considered to be placed closer together, but the later schemes show it offsetting the front and rear set of tracks. This was referred to as crabbed and would ensure the M.R.V. didn't leave any mines in between its tracks. It also slightly increased the area it could cover from 10 feet 10 inches to 11 feet 4.5 inches. These tracks would be driven by an electric motor fed power by a Leyland L60 multi-fuel engine with an auxiliary engine for battery charging and for the hydraulic steering pumps. Initially, this project was led by the Fighting Vehicles Research and Development Establishment, or FVRDE. They would create an unpowered rolling test rig to simulate the vehicle's suspension, which was tested both against mine blasts and moving tests at 8 miles per hour. This test rig, as well as an earlier rig which simulated the shape of road wheels, were completed prior to December of 1959 with 5 reported test detonations. What may be the earliest photo of the original rig shows it mounted to a Tortoise tank destroyer. This is most likely one of the last 2 tortoises, P5 or P6, with Ed believing it to be P5 Adventurer, which was in the BAOR. The tracks appear quite different from the later ones, so this makes me think it was an earlier form of the project. By October 1960, the track design had changed to a less traditional layout made up of cast links. These links were shaped to allow the blast to pass upward through them with minimal resistance, and the elliptical shape was chosen to prevent the track from being broken through force exerted sideways. Although not an exact comparison, this layout was sort of like linking several bike chains together on a massive scale. In November of 1960, the project would then be passed to Vickers, who would take over the development from there. At this point, the design had essentially reached the final layout, with the front and rear set of tracks being attached to the main body with 4 walking beams. Assuming the proposal here is the same as they refer to, these form a pair of triangular arms which then connect to the drives as well as supplying power to them. Upon receiving this project, Vickers would focus their efforts on the following.
The main area for developments were to be the vehicle steering and methods for full ground coverage, the walking beam suspension, a remote control system, and a method for driving the tracks, which could be a conventional tracked vehicle mechanical drive, hydraulic, or electric.
From this, we can tell that at this stage, the project was still in its infancy, with much work still to be done. The following year, after more progress had been made, a few more proposals were made, including development of individual track drives and suggestions for a human driver rather than remote control, among others. At this point, consideration for live fire trials began, with preparations continuing into 1963. The preparations included development of the test rig as well as receiving a Conqueror to mount the rig to. Trials would then begin from June to December of that year on individual sprockets to test the materials and design strengths or weaknesses. Following the completion of these trials, the entire project was suspended for the better part of 2 years before work resumed in March 1965. By April, the live fire tests resumed, and after the information gleaned from them was used to strengthen the original roller rig, the test rig was now complete. Tests of the now complete test rig fitted to the modified Conqueror hull began in May, and by September of 1965, it was decided to now manufacture a fully powered test rig. Tests continued with the non-powered rig for several years, still using the Conqueror hull, with different components as the data from previous tests was used to make improvements. Finally, in September of 1967, the powered mobile rig was complete, and the first live range test was conducted in October. As should be expected, this test revealed design flaws, with the 20-pound HE charge fracturing a cast part of the walking beam frame. The sprocket and track survived, however, proving, quote,
"The single test, although not sufficient proof in itself, gives confidence that further development along these lines will evolve a suitable walking beam unit, a major step to development of a prototype vehicle."
Unfortunately, the damage caused by the blast meant that further tests could not be carried out. Despite solid progress and promising results from the roughly 32 live tests, the project was suspended in November for financial reasons. In hindsight, a dedicated minesweeping vehicle built out of proprietary components, especially for a nation like the UK, was likely not worth the cost. Systems mounted to functional or modified tanks make more sense logistically and had already been proven in combat by that point. These sorts of devices can also be fitted onto engineering vehicles, which both saves money and allows for a multi-purpose vehicle rather than one dedicated to one specific task. The concept itself was certainly sound, and other nations did consider similar methods for dealing with minefields, but considering none of these have entered production, it is relatively clear that the costs outweigh the potential benefits. What do you think of this lumbering juggernaut? Was it a design not given the funding it deserved, or was it yet another engineering dead end which became a Cold War money pit? Let me know in the comments. As I mentioned earlier, this video was created using original documentation from the archives, which is something I want to continue doing more in the future. This does come with additional expenses though, so if you want to help support my work, there are a few ways you can do so. The easiest is to simply share this video and subscribe to the channel, but you can also buy some of my tank-themed merch if you feel so inclined. I have also recently partnered with the company Warbricks USA, who is a US distributor of Kobe and Kata sets, allowing you to save 5% on your purchase using the code ConeOfArc, and every purchase directly supports the channel at no additional cost to you. Last but certainly not least, you can become a member of my ConelyFans like these amazing people. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you on one of my future videos.